So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Raksha, and I am a practicing medical doctor in Durban, and I am actually specialized in palliative medicine. And dealing with loss and grief is very close to home for me. Of late, I have been feeling very helpless to support the many children that are losing loved ones. And so at the Brahma Kumaris, which is a spiritual organization in South Africa and in 130 countries across the world, a few of us had gathered to look at how we can meet this need of the time, a need that many are facing with so many leaving through COVID, sudden deaths, and cancer. And so we've also recognized that, teenagers and children grieve in their own way. And of late, we've been feeling very helpless in how to support the many children that are losing loved ones. And, and as adults, it would be quite valuable to know what children go through and how to help them, what to say, what to look out for. And I've been just reflecting on how this time has really unearthed a need to help adults gain the skills and tools to help children who are grieving. I have seen many children who have lost parents, grandparents, and the surviving parent, the educators, the caregivers struggle to know what to do and when to do what they need to do. And so for myself of late, I've received many calls from many individuals asking, to especially meet this need, grandchildren having lost grandparents, other children taking on the role of caregivers at the age of 6 or 7, because having lost one grandparent, they want to really be there for the other grandparent. Some children becoming rebellious or more introverted. And so as adults, it is so valuable to understand this time for a child and how we can support them and do what we can at this time that is so tender for them. And so we had approached many individuals, and Anwin and Nina are with us today, and they are here to assist us with this very important task. And I personally look forward to learning from today's session. It was wonderful meeting and chatting with Anwin and Nina, and I feel it will be a beautiful afternoon where we can learn a lot from Anwin and Nina. And they have asked that if you have any questions, to type it into the chat so we can approach them during their session, but also at the end we will have time for questions and answers. And so if there's any need you want met personally, in dealing with your own personal circumstance, do type it into the chat, and I will then put it forward to them at the right time. And so today, to begin with, I would like to invite Anwin to join us. And Anwin has been a practicing educational psychologist for over 20 years and a wealth of experience personally and in her work. She currently has her own practice in Durban, in Glenwood, and she also works for Kulu Education in the deep rural parts of KwaZulu-Natal. Her area of interest has included assisting children and families with emotional difficulties, and more recently, coping with the current pandemic. And so it has been my pleasure to meet with Anwin and to share my own personal challenges on this topic with her so that she can broach this in today's session. So welcome, Anwin.
Hi, good afternoon, Raksha. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really glad to be with you this afternoon and for this opportunity to talk about such an important part of life. And I think that's something that Raksha mentioned when we spoke about the today's session is death is a part of life, and it's a part of life that that we can't escape, and nor should we want to. And yeah, I'm coming here as a psychologist, but I'm also a person who's living in the world of COVID now, working in the world of COVID. I'm also a mother, so I've got one adult child and two teenagers. So I've had my own experiences of death and grief as well, which is part of my normal life experience as well, and formative experiences that have definitely shaped me. So I understand that talking about death can be really uncomfortable. I think there are a lot of taboos in our society where it's a subject that we tend to avoid. And maybe we avoid it just as a way of protecting ourselves, because it's only natural to want to really hold on to the people that we love, and to avoid loss and losing people. Um, but death comes into all communities and to all families at some time, and it's an important thing, I would say, to be prepared for. Even though I guess we can never be fully prepared to lose the earthly life of someone that we love. So my role today is going to be, most of all, to talk to you about children, particularly the younger children, because it's so important to be able to support them with some knowledge at mental stages, because children don't always grieve in the exact same way as adults. They have their own ways of understanding and of processing emotions and their own beliefs about life, and their capacity for understanding death. So just to start off with, I think when I think about my two earliest experiences about death and about loss, the first one actually came to me when I was 4 years old, and a friend of mine drowned. And I have, even though that was a good 45 or so years ago, I still have very clear memories of it. And shortly after that, I think I was 5 years old, I was told that before I was born, my mom gave birth to a stillborn baby. And I don't think my parents were quite prepared for the reaction I had. My mom really battled with losing a child in this way. But for me, it was a magical opportunity to have that brother that I'd always dreamt of. So I decided that there was a boy baby, and I decided that I had a brother. And I needed to make contact with this brother of mine. So I gave him life. I decided that I had a brother who was 5 years older than me and was at boarding school. And I went around telling everyone about this brother, whom I named Charles after the Prince of Wales. And um, I feel for my parents, because I do remember them taking me aside and saying, maybe you can talk about that at home, but you shouldn't be telling everyone else about this. But I'm so grateful that my parents gave me that opportunity to experience the loss of an older brother or sister, in a way that I chose to experience it. Because for me, I was at that age, 5 and 6, I was grappling with the idea of life, of death. And I guess in some way it was easy to understand it was permanent, because my brother had never come back. But what I did gain was a way of feeling that he was part of my identity. I had the feeling of an older brother in my life who was there to look out for me and protect me. And it was so interesting for me, looking back now, how even at that age, yes, there was grief that I had to experience. There was sadness for me. And I had to adjust to a life without ever having an older brother. And yet I found a connection to him. And there were many times growing up in difficult times, I felt a sense of his presence. So I feel that my parents gave me an amazing gift of being able to work through that loss in a way that was natural to me. And I think there would be many parents who wouldn't have actually honored that you could grieve someone who died before one's own birth. So I was really grateful to that. Yeah, and I feel that early learning really helped me later in life when I experienced the losses of people who were closer to me. And then another loss that comes to mind is completely different. It was when my eldest child was a toddler. And I guess I had, through my reading, I knew that it was important to talk to children about death before there was actually a loss. So we had pets, knowing that eventually the pets would die. But my daughter, she preempted all of this. She found a dead butterfly. And at the age of 2, she says, "Look, mommy, the flower's gone." Um, and that was the beginning of her starting to understand at such a young age. No, she didn't say gone, she said finished. The flower's finished. So that was a lovely way to talk about, yes, the butterfly's finished. And say, to talk about death of flowers, of butterflies, but it's part of the experience of life. And I think more and more, death needs to become part of our conversation, not just during times of grief. To add on to that, I think what can be quite complicated is that children develop their own perceptions and understanding of death at their own paces. And I wish that I could present to you a textbook of, this is the age, this is the stage, this is what to expect, and this is what to do, kind of like a cookbook. But I think with parenting, I mean, for me certainly, and most people I've spoken to, we all wish that there was some kind of cookbook on parenting, something that gave us the recipe and told us what to do and how to handle all the complexities. But there's no manual, there's no cookbook. So what I think I'm going to do today is, rather than give you just plain facts and cookbook style, to tell you stories about people I've met, some about clients that I've had as well over the years, who've had their own experiences of grief and loss. And of course, because of confidentiality, I've changed things. I've kind of changed things around so that you're unlikely to recognize the person. But all these experiences and the stories are based on how children over the years have experienced loss. Jasmina. And Jasmina she's currently an adult who's busy processing some things in therapy. And she lost her father when she was only 3 months old. And of course, it was as a result of injuries after an accident at work. And for Jasmina as an infant, it did affect her, because she had not only a bond with her father, but she had a very close bond with her mother and both grandparents. So with all the grief and the struggle in the home, Jasmina, who had been a very easygoing baby, started to battle to sleep, was struggling to feed, a whole lot of those kinds of difficulties that could be seen as, as a sign of stress in an infant. And as much as she would not have had a real independent concept of life or death, there was the attachment. And I think what she experienced a lot of was almost the secondhand grief of her mother and grandparents, who were just so overwhelmed by their emotions and the suddenness of this loss, that it was really hard for them to soothe her. And how at this time an aunt stepped in, an aunt and an uncle, and they were the ones who would do the sleep time routine, and got her back into a routine, because their grief wasn't as intense at that time. And so Jasmina was able to, as a baby, settle again and settle into a normal routine. So I think that points to, with when there are young children, babies involved, how important it is to support the parents practically. But I think the other thing is that it's important that that grief, loss, and attachment is something that continues through the life cycle, because Jasmina is now an adult and she has her own child, a son, and he's growing up to look like his grandfather. And the attachment that she had with her father, it still endures. And a lot of her questions right now are, how at this stage now of being a young mom, do I feel this attachment to my father? How do I connect with him? Will he be proud of me? What would he think? And I think that's for me, quite a lovely example of how significant parents are, maybe grandparents, even to infants who don't have a concept like we as adults do of life and death, but that attachment is real. and that attachment is something that endures beyond death as we know it. So when it comes to the loss of a family member or a close member of the community, when it's an infant, they need their routine to stay the same. They need a lot of holding, a lot of comfort, and they need playful interactions too. So a big part of that is the community offering a lot of support and practical support to the parents. Then next, I want to introduce you to a little girl. She's not as little now as she was when she was 18 months. She was, her mother was in a horrific accident and died very suddenly while Brianna was in the car with her. And the extended family really rallied together, and their focus was on this little girl, on wanting to ensure that all her physical needs were met, that her emotional needs were met. The father was supported by his family, by his in-laws, and there were other women in the family who already had close bonds, who were able to step in to the mother role. And when Brianna came in for play therapy as a preschooler, it was really interesting to see how the family had really helped her to work through the tasks of grief. And that's just the concept I'd like to introduce you to. William Warden has become very well known for his work in grief, how to process the emotions of grief and how to get through it. And the first phase that he speaks about is accepting the reality of the loss. So for Brianna, perhaps this was a little bit easier for her because she was so young that the reality of her mother no longer being alive on earth was a reality that she grew into fairly easily. The family were very involved in helping her with the second task of grief, to experience the pain of the loss, because as she grew, she was aware that other children had mothers, and she didn't have a mother. She had loving aunts and grannies, but not a mother. And she was allowed to express that grief. Mother's Day was always a painful time, but the family would always be there with a solution to support her. And so she adjusted to life without her mom. The family were also amazing in helping her despite the death. And they would have routines and rituals. They would start off by releasing balloons in memory of her mother at birthdays, at religious ceremonies, so that Brianna, she grew up with a very clear understanding that her mother was part of her everyday life. The family actually started to be, in fact, Brianna herself raised the fact that her mother wouldn't have liked the balloons because they are not environmentally friendly. So they've now moved on to blowing bubbles as a way of sending their breath and their life and their love to the mom. So so for Brianna, she's been able to, despite a really, really difficult early start, she's really adjusted very well. And with this particular family, what had actually happened was that they become so concerned and focused on this little girl that in fact she had worked through the loss and really has embraced her mom in her life, but it was actually the family, the adults who needed to process their grief, and they were actually led by the child. So I think that was an amazing story. What was also amazing about this is that when I was working with Brianna, I introduced her to a really lovely story. It's called The Invisible String by Patrice Cast. It's a book that's available on the various online platforms, and there are also some YouTube videos of it being read out. And it's a story about a mom who speaks to her children and saying that no matter what, there's an invisible string from my heart to yours that joins us together. And it's not only about death, it's if you're at school and I'm at home, there's an invisible string. When you're in your room and I'm in my room, there's an invisible string. And it really helps to give children a concrete picture of the very abstract idea of a bond with someone that we can't see. And over the time of COVID, I was just so impressed with Brianna because she had quite a few playmates who lost family members to COVID. And she was the one who at school told the whole class the story about the invisible string. And she was able to, in her own age appropriate way, talk to her friends about it and give them some kind of comfort. And she took on a role as a bit of a grief counselor at the age of 5, I think it is. So I think that's another story about how even in really adverse situations, children can be resilient, and how the support of family, even family who are struggling to come to terms with the loss, can be very, very comforting for a child. And I think that also when it comes to this comforting, the comfort that children need, our language is quite important. I'm thinking about another child of a similar age who developed sleep difficulties because the family referred to the death as going to sleep forever. And the child was just so afraid of dying in her sleep, or of a parent dying in his or her sleep, that yeah, she developed a difficulty with sleeping at night and being very anxious at night. So I think that's another thing that can just add to our ability to meet children where they're at, and be careful of the language that we use. Another little girl that I've been in contact with over the years, she traumatically lost her mom to suicide. And that was, of course, a very, very traumatic experience for the whole family. And in this situation, we saw what we see very commonly in children when there's been a loss, which is acting out behavior, where children cry a lot, have tantrums, sometimes regress to more to like younger ways of being, like they won't eat, want to be fed, talk like a baby. Children who might have been toilet trained a while ago suddenly go back to wanting to wear nappies. So this little girl, she regressed a lot at that stage, and a lot of acting out behavior, physical aggression, and to the point of actually being suicidal herself, wanting to jump out of windows. And this is very alarming for parents and teachers and family, when children sometimes do experience very big emotions, and how it's really hard when we're wanting to protect children and keep them calm. Sometimes we can't, and sometimes they actually need to just be wild for a while, and to be able to express those really, really big feelings. And so for Malaika, it was coming to therapy, where because her emotions were just so intense that the grieving family, it wasn't reasonable for them to be able to contain all of that. But in therapy over time, she really has grown up into a very emotionally mature and lovely child. But it hasn't come without a lot of hard work. And I think that, she's really reminded me of William Morden's Second Stage, how important it is to let children experience the pain of grief. And it can be very intense, and sometimes there's no way around it. You've just got to go through it. And when the child's grief is just too intense for parents to cope with, that's okay. That's when it takes a village to raise a child. And it might be getting support from another family member. It might be psychotherapy for the child. Because little Malaika has found her way through it. Her behaviors calm down. She talks about her mother. In fact, she's actually now in primary school. And again, she's moved on to the next stage of development, where her question is, what would my mum be like if she was alive now? So she's again wanting to not only adjust to life without her mom, because she's had family members and teachers who've been amazing, but she needs to find a connection to her mom, and also a way for her mom to live on in her own life, so that she can still relate to her mother, who she remembers as a very loving and a nurturing parent. So I think that's quite another thing, is sometimes children have very intense emotions. And even though children are small people, they're actually capable and they have the capacity to experience intense emotion, and that can be part of the healing. Children also can become very intrigued by death, because it's very normal for children who are in preschool right up to primary school to not really believe or understand that death is permanent. So it's very common and normal for children to talk about, well, when my daddy comes back again, or when my gran is home from heaven. And that is a normal part of a child not understanding the abstract nature of death. So it can be alarming if you don't expect it, but it's a lovely opportunity, perhaps, when it comes and you are expecting it, or you're able to respond to it. Because something that I've found is when a child says, well, it's Easter's coming and my auntie is going to come back from the dead. And you say, no, it's not going to happen that way. Oh, yes, it is, because sometimes little people are experts in their own worlds. Obviously, we can't buy into it by saying, yes, she will be coming back, because that's setting a child up for disappointment. And we need to be honest. But it's a lovely time to start to use the magical wish. So to give the child that sense of understanding and empathy, and mirror what they're feeling, is say, I really wish Auntie would come back at Easter, or I really wish that Grandpa would come back from heaven, or I wish he could be alive again. So to talk about I wish to, it puts you on the same side of grief, where it's not arguing with the child against their perceptions, but really mirroring our wish to be connected with that person again. So looking also at children from the preschool age, they often do have these magical thinking ideas. And I'm just thinking about a friend of mine who told me that he was busy eating oats porridge when he was told that his aunt was terminally ill with cancer. And to this day, he has an aversion to oats porridge, because he still believes that's what causes cancer and terminal illness. And children, because of their level of development, often do this. They kind of leap to like illogical conclusions, or might have magical beliefs that perhaps, if I do this, so and so will come alive again, or there are various options. And with children, I think a lot of what we're needing to be doing as adults is really listening to them, to find out what it is that what if there is a belief, or what they're thinking about death, what they're thinking about where their loved one is. And I'm reminded of twin boys who lost their grandfather to COVID fairly recently. It was a very close family who really worked well at dealing with the grief. But at some time, they even had like a special funeral that was just for all the grandchildren. So it was done in a very informed, sensitive way for children to understand. And then the one boy, suddenly, he was a very calm, gentle boy, suddenly became volatile and angry. And parents were very, very concerned. And he came to visit me. And what had happened for him is that he had made the connection that his grandfather was now a ghost. And in his mind, a ghost is something that has a white sheet over it and it has arms and no legs. So he was thinking about his grandfather as a ghost in heaven, and very troubled by this, because his grandfather had been an active man. And how could he do anything fun in heaven if he had no legs? So we were able to talk about this and to kind of realize that, well, where did you hear that? And it wasn't from that reliable a source. And when he realized that his grandfather had legs in heaven, suddenly we could talk about, well, what do you think heaven is like for your grandfather? And for him to paint a picture in his mind and to draw it on paper about heaven. And he created a lovely story that that heaven is a place where you can do all the things that you love. And his grandfather used to love swimming in the sea. So now that he's in heaven, he can go as deep as he wants to because he can't drown because he's already dead. And he's already dead, so he can't get eaten by sharks. So he doesn't have to be afraid. And this little boy went home with a lovely image of his grandfather having a life in heaven. And that got him through the next stage. His twin brother had a different experience. He became very withdrawn and started to talk about wanting to die. And this alarmed the family a lot. It turned out that he wasn't suicidal. He didn't want to die in a permanent way because he didn't yet have the concept of death as being permanent. He just really needed to feel close to his grandfather. And he needed to, he wanted to visit his grandfather. So he needed to do a lot of talking about memories. And what had also happened for him was he developed very unusual separation anxiety from his own father. And once he'd overcome this, so he was able to resolve the separation anxiety, to be able to go to school on his own, be able to say goodbye to his father when it was time for work, and to resolve some of his struggles. So with all of with these children who had, it's really just a very small group of children who had stories that have told me a lot about how children cope with death. I think the important things to bear in mind is that each child has his or own individual way of dealing with death. Some children at an early stage realize that death is, that a person will not come back to life, that it's not reversible. Other children take a lot longer. Even teenagers will sometimes act like younger children when they've lost someone very close to them. It's a kind of regression, and it's something they need to go through. I'm thinking of another teenager whose grandmother died of COVID, and even though he was old enough to know it was illogical, he was traumatized by a memory he had of wanting something that was very expensive, and then thinking, oh, when my grandmother dies, I could inherit money and then I can buy it. And then remembering that thought gave him this huge fear that maybe it caused her death. So yeah, children often have ideas that we would think are irrational, but it's usually limited by their cognitive developments. I think we often think of children as not being able to cope with intense emotions, whereas children actually have a huge capacity to experience emotions. And I think that children also have the capacity to grieve as part of the family, but sometimes they do need a bit of extra care and concern to help them through their own individual process. So I'm afraid I haven't come to you today with a recipe book or a step-by-step how to do it. I think more just to realize that death is part of life. It's something that is going to come and visit us from time to time, our families, and we've got to prepare for our own reality that we'll all are immortal, or not are mortal. And I think what I haven't touched on, but I think would be another part of a conversation when there's more time, is that when it comes to grief and the process of grieving, we need to be very true to our own spiritual and cultural belief systems, to be able to understand the meaning of life, and the meaning of life, which is connected to the meaning of death. And that death is a passage, it's a real thing, but that even though a person is not with us, we can still continue a relationship. Relationships can still grow. There's still time for more understanding, for getting to know a person different as we go through different stages of our own lives. There's still time for forgiveness. There's still time for celebration, and that relationships grow and that life goes on through all the different stages, including death. Thanks, everybody. That's what I've prepared so far today, but I'm very open to taking any questions now or at a later stage. So over to you, Aksha.
Thank you, Anwin. Really, I think it's great that we have this on YouTube so we could go through some of the many, many beautiful personal experiences that you've shared. I found it very wholesome just to listen to the stories and how unique the journey of grief can be for children. And what I really take home is that it's so important to listen and to be present and to really understand the child and their fears and how they've made sense of the whole situation for themselves personally. And once you understand that, you can help them unpack it. And also, so many beautiful things that you shared, that children are more resilient than we can ever imagine. So many become very scared when it comes to grief and a child. But I'm reassured from what you've shared that children can embrace the loss, and like your amazing 5-year-old, can become grief counselors for their fellow students at school, and really amazing stories. So it's so beautiful, and the aspect of when they create concrete picture like you yourself had done with your pretend brother, it's quite normal, and it's not something to fear or think that the child is lost and confused. I myself, I've heard of the children of the parents that I had helped, doing such things like leaving food out for the grandparent, and I wasn't sure whether this was normal. Did we need to do something about this? But it's wonderful to have heard all that you have shared, and that this is part of the journey of healing, and to let the child experience the pain of the grief, because in that will also come that healing, and children are resilient. And I loved also the thought that it takes a village to raise a child. And so don't carry the burden alone, because personally, maybe I'm not best equipped as the parent or the one who had also loved and lost someone. I can reach out, and I can allow others into the space to help me, to help the child. And I love the aspect of the magical wish as well. So to know what to say, when to say, and that was a wonderful tool. So not to shut down the child, but to wish with them, for better, and to help them heal on that journey. And really, for me, the take-home message is just listen and trust that they are resilient people, in those bodies, and to support them in that way. So we look forward to any questions you may have for Anwin. And if you can write it into the chat, I'll ask her that a little later. And maybe there's something that you're struggling with your child, or with your grandchild, and if you could type it in, we'll definitely ask Anwin that question. And thank you for sharing in that very beautiful way of storytelling, so that we could learn deeply from all these examples. So thank you, Anwin. And now I have the deep pleasure to invite Nina Buchanan to join us. And she's an amazing, busy lady all the way from London. And Nina has a background in corporate management within the social housing movement, and she has worked with social services as a family group dynamics practitioner, and later in secondary schools as a parent support advisor, working with parents one-on-one as well as through parenting groups. And she currently offers family group dynamics counseling support to families facing relationship breakdown. She's also an independent UK funeral celebrant. It's always wonderful to hear of these different ways in which people can celebrate life and celebrate when one loses life. And so it's amazing. Nina has also been doing that of late, and she's also a student of Raja Yoga meditation, and has for the last 25 years, and is a meditation teacher in London as well. So welcome, Nina, and thank you for making time to be with us, and we really look forward to hearing you share as well today.
So thank you so much, Raksha, for this beautiful introduction. And lastly, but certainly not least, thanks to Anwin for those really beautiful stories that she shared about how families have become really resilient in supporting children and teenagers through grieving. So the first thing I want to say in my introduction to the topic is that as carers and elders, it's important to understand that we cannot pour from an empty cup. In other words, if we can't help ourselves, we cannot help others. And from a spiritual perspective, the art of understanding ourselves and understanding others is fundamental to the topic of helping grieving children and teenagers. And I want to mention a quote from a book I've read many years ago and still continue to read from time to time. And it's a book by an author who is now deceased. His name was Stephen Covey, and he wrote the book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. And he puts it really succinctly. He said, the deepest hunger of the human heart is to be understood. The deepest hunger of the human heart is to be understood. And from what I understand from that quote is that he's saying that feeling heard, being acknowledged and being seen, for me, begins the healing process of any traumatic experience. As we all know, the grieving process is a traumatic experience, even for adults. So feeling heard, being acknowledged and being seen set the foundation for inner and outer harmony, as Anwin so really described so well in her stories. And being able to listen, not just to myself, but to others, is a precursor to understanding. But how do I develop the art of understanding others before being able to get beyond my inner unconscious chatter and really listen to myself? And for me, the secret lies within the phrase. This is another phrase, not by Stephen Covey, but certainly from my experience as a Raj Yoga meditation student. The inner determines the outer. Whatever is going on inside is what I am expressing on the outer. So if I am unable to support a young person or a child through this process of grieving, then I'm unable to do that for myself. So the inner determines the outer means I need to interact with myself in the same way as if I am in relationship with another person. So being able to listen to my thoughts and tap into my feelings without judgment, being able to help those children, for example, create magic, which is not logical for me as an adult, but I'm doing it anyway because I'm tapping into the feelings of that child. and being able to lovingly accept myself no matter what, tapping into my feelings and being able to love myself no matter what is the basis for transforming worst feeling thoughts that really get in the way of my listening to my child or the teenager who is experiencing grief, transforming those worst feeling thoughts into good feeling thoughts. That's the job of a carer. That's the job of the adult who is supporting the younger person. So this for me is empathic inner listening. Not sure if there's such a word or phrase, empathic inner listening, but the practice of meditation best describes the process as it is a practice that offers us the chance to really get to intimately know oneself, which involves listening, seeing, and acknowledging the non-physical self, which Anwin alluded to, that non-physical self that can swim under the sea without feeling in danger. Acknowledging the non-physical self, which is my inner, my real identity. Stephen Covey also talked about, he said, another quote, seek to understand rather than being understood, which means when I understand myself, I can more be equipped to understand others. And going further, empathic listening is something we can practice is in being able to understand. Stephen Covey talks about being the faithful translator. So what is the faithful translator? The faithful translator sees through the eyes of another, listens through the ears of another, and feels through the heart of another. As parents and carers, are we capable of doing that? I would say that this type of listening and understanding isn't taught in our education system. So the majority of us isn't capable of communicating at this level of awareness, but it's possible to learn through practicing meditation, which is getting to know the self through listening and understanding the self. When I'm in touch with my own feelings, it becomes easier for me to tap into the feelings of the child or teenager with little verbal exchange, as I experienced when I spent a very enjoyable and memorable 2 weeks in Japan many years ago, with a family with whom there wasn't the language, the medium of language to communicate. They didn't speak English and I didn't speak Japanese, yet they catered for my needs 100%. So when we practice listening empathic, we become so detached from our own likes and dislikes, our prejudices, and unconscious mechanisms in such a way that we tap into the deeply hidden motives as to why, for example, the child or the teenager may be showing opposition, or where there is conflict in that relationship. When we listen empathically, we understand that everything happens for a reason, understanding how and why, for example, the teenager thinks and behaves in a particular way, and how the child tends to behave at different stages of their development as they move into adulthood. We see the child throwing tantrums of different types and the teenager being reclusive and moody as they transition through their developmental stages, it's often not about their disrespect to the parents and loved ones if we care to listen empathically in order to understand. When I'm in touch with my own feelings, it becomes easier for me to tap into the feelings of the teenager with very little verbal exchange. At times like this, it's not what we say, it's the changes we make within ourselves to accommodate them, like being more present to their immediate needs within that grieving process, as Anwin mentioned also in her stories, being able to meet them where they're at the level of their trauma jar. So there's a concept which I'll explain a bit later about the trauma jar. So at the level of their trauma jar, to avoid further psychological damage for the young person. For example, when as adults we lack self-awareness, which means we don't understand the true self, that part of us that remains after the body dies. Death or loss of any kind and bereavement can be quite an overwhelming experience under those circumstances when we do not understand or know the true self. And this means that we are not equipped to support another. And the tendency is to avoid the topic, even though it's blatantly obvious that the child teenager is grieving. There is an organization, the Sue Ryder organization, that caters for the needs of bereaved children. And I was watching a video clip the other day of a young person who lost her sister 9 months after losing her mother, and how she was supported by a young a couple who themselves had 6 younger children to look after. She explained that before meeting the family, she wanted to talk about what she was feeling, but no one in her environment was willing to support her in this way. She felt that people around her found it too overwhelming to engage with the feelings that the topic triggered for them. And this made her feel lonely and abandoned on top of her feelings of loss. So spending time with the family gave her renewed zest for life and acceptance of having lost her mom and her sister. So just going back for a bit to the concept of the trauma jar, the principle works with another relevant concept called met and unmet needs. So how does the trauma jar interface with unmet needs, for example? Because they are very relevant principles in terms of coping with grief. So the trauma jar and unmet needs theories come from different eras and from different schools of thought, but they interface to provide an understanding of how we can support ourselves and others to regulate negative emotional behavior patterns in the grieving process when triggered by a tragic accident. So met and unmet needs starts from the premise that every person has a bag of qualities and virtues that they can draw on. And when faced with a crisis, we often shift our awareness into the zone of unmet needs. It means that those qualities and virtues are very kind of low. We tend not to be aware that they're there, and we become angry, upset, agitated. So that's being in the zone of unmet needs. And that's where we exhibit the 4 stages. And I say the 4 stages because they are anger, bargaining, sadness, or whatever it is. I can't remember them exactly, but the 4 stages of the grieving process. And that person needs to be supported by others around them. The 5th stage of the grieving process is acceptance, but that does not come into the domain of unmet needs. Acceptance is a met need because that's within us that we can tap into, and we can be supported in order to get to that stage of acceptance. So looking at the trauma jar now, the principle recognizes that everyone has their own window of tolerance when the demands from the world around them are both tolerable and bearable. When a child is in their window of tolerance, they are able to think, they are able to learn, and this means that their needs are being met. However, when the child is exposed to trauma, this window is much narrower, such as the loss of a loved one. They will move very quickly outside their window of tolerance. They are then within the zone of unmet needs and require support. So when we practice meditation, we have access to the tools for bringing ourselves back into alignment when the trauma jar is full, or within the domain, or when we're within the domain of unmet needs. So we can see over a period of time how the body deteriorates from that of a newly born baby to an older person nearing death, as we call it. When the non-physical part of us is our consciousness, and there is universal understanding that consciousness cannot die. Yes, the body has died, but the eternal part of our identity is immortal and simply transitions. We grieve because we don't know this aspect of ourselves, therefore we cannot relate to it. Hence, when the soul leaves the body, we see it as death. So when as adults we understand this, we are better able to help the younger generation through their grieving process, which is not age-related. So it's important that we become present to the 5 stages of grieving, which provides us with a map, which is natural. It's a natural process. All of those emotional states that we get ourselves into, as Anwin was saying earlier on, maybe we should just hold that space around the child to grieve. The anger, the feeling of sadness. So to become more present to the 5 stages of grieving provides us with a map. It provides us with a signpost and a compass of self-awareness to enable us to successfully navigate the terrain of the birth of something new, like a new relationship, a new job, renewed health and well-being, to the death of death or change of that experience, which is a natural part of life. So what I want to do now, just before I do a short guided meditation, I just want to finish by saying that self-awareness is knowing and embracing my true identity as a non-physical being, being so comfortable with who I am that I can accept those uncomfortable stages of grief. When we seek to understand rather than be understood, we are laying the foundation to support the younger generation through the grieving process, which is inevitable. Yes, in this we are being challenged to grow, but it's a challenge that we cannot afford to avoid. Otherwise, we are trapped in ignorance. When we face the challenge in staying awake, to accepting loss and change and learning from that experience, we are honoring life. We are honoring the wisdom that life brings to us. When we see loss or change as a natural part of life and acquiring wisdom, we become present to our role as elders in creating an environment where our children become the wise elders of tomorrow. And so what I would like to do now in finishing my segment is to speak a few words of guided meditation. Okay. So make yourselves comfortable and allow yourself to become still and quiet. Focusing your attention on your breathing. So this is a meditation to heal your inner child, to build self-love, self-esteem, and recognize your own worth and provide guidance to enhance your role as a compassionate carer for bereaved children and teenagers. So simply allow the words to soak into your subconscious, planting seeds of healthy beliefs as you listen. Inhale and simply allow the silent space to fill your mind. Exhale the chatter, energy, and self-talk. As you get ready for change, inhale again and taking in fresh new air. Exhale. Again, taking your time, letting your mind slow down. Continue to inhale and exhale, unwinding the circular inner self-talk. Slowly scanning your body from head down to your neck. Let the breath flow through your neck and shoulders, allowing your torso to expand with every breath. The body goes soft. The mind, the thoughts go quiet as breathing deepens, and you can let go. Let yourself get really comfortable. And whatever story you have been telling yourself, you can tell that voice to go quiet now. And you can invite in a kinder, gentler voice. As you sink deeper down, you hear that kinder, gentler voice from deep within you, thanking you for taking this time and feel all that your body does to house you, the soul. Give thanks. Your body houses a brilliant soul. Give thanks. Each one of us has a body, a soul, a mind, and each mind is unique, just as all DNA is different. We are all unique. Our uniqueness is what makes us wonderful. And yet somewhere along the way, we have decided to stop listening to the inner voice. By doing so, we limit our growth. We deny the very aspect of ourselves that blooms when we nurture our inner world. The very aspect that empower us to care for our loved ones in times of great need. What would it mean to hear yourself, see yourself, and acknowledge yourself? What would it mean to connect with the feelings of the child, the teenager, as they experience the grieving process? And as a new day begins, you begin to see, you notice a figure, a small figure, walking through the wheat or tall grass in the distance ahead, gently parting the way. And as you look closer and closer, they get more and more familiar. You stand there waiting. And as they get closer, you recognize the clothing, the familiar face, the hair. This is your child self. And notice how old they look. Notice the expression on their face. Where have they come from? And your child self walks up to you. Notice how you feel when you meet eye to eye. This child aspect of you is showing you itself for a particular reason. There is something about the age, the time, and you now as the parent self, your child self. You now have the wisdom, the language, the understanding to explain past events to your child self and to show total acceptance, to reintegrate this aspect of you into yourself. So now, just take a moment to answer any questions and demonstrate total acceptance of this aspect of you that has perhaps been ignored, repressed, isolated. Take a few moments to provide any explanation, provide the words of understanding that your child self would not. And reconnect and allow your child self to step into the light, to bloom into the uniqueness of who you really are.
Thank you, Nina. That was beautiful. And I'm just reflecting on all the wisdom you'd shared, and especially this aspect of I can't give from a cup that's not full. And so the importance of really seeking to understand rather than to be understood. So in keeping with the trauma jar as well that you had mentioned. And I really loved how you shared to be that faithful translator. So, so in helping grieving children and teenagers, really, if I am really aware and self-aware of my own inner feelings, and I can work with that, I then allow the child or the teenager to be more open to then share with me or feel comfortable enough to share. And so I really valued that. And so to listen and to feel through the heart of another. So very beautiful to be that empathic listener, and not. I really enjoyed what you had shared. So it's not about the change we make outside as much as it is about the change we make inside ourselves, and how sometimes that avoidance can create a feeling of abandonment or loneliness for the teenager. Mm-hmm. And with traumas, we do go more into the aspect of unmet needs. And so all of us possibly had journeyed like that. And so that trauma does put us off balance. And how can I come back to balance? And so how can I meet those unmet needs? And the beautiful tool of silence, reflection, meditation, listening to that inner child. And then I can listen to the children that surround me and are in my world. So thank you beautifully for that. And I love the word, to help children understand, teenagers understand that death is a transition and consciousness lives on. Consciousness is immortal. So beautiful. Thank you so much for that sharing. And it's really been such a wealth of information shared this afternoon. And there are a few questions that we want to bring up in this moment. Some on YouTube had brought up some questions. And while you were sharing, many were reflecting on how they now understand why their children after miscarriage had reacted the way they did and created friends I never understood until now. And another two individuals actually asked how to broach the topic with children who don't want to talk about the lost grandmother. So how can I start the conversation with my children? Another shared, I lost my dad 1.5 years ago. My kids don't talk about it and share their grief with us. So two individuals who want to know how to begin that conversation with the child or the teenager. So does anyone want to take that up? And when are you?
Yeah, so I'll start with some thoughts. I think that it's always a difficult topic to broach when it's something that isn't talked about a lot in the family. And I think with children, they learn a lot from what they overhear, not only what we tell to them directly. And I think that if children don't want to talk about a person who's not with them in a bodied form at the moment, it might be that what they first need to do is overhear their parents talking in a way that they can understand and feel safe with. And I think the other thing is that, I'm speaking to myself as someone from a Western culture. I think I come from a culture where we lack tradition and meaning. And I think we, around people who've transitioned or passed, we need to often recreate traditions and times where we can make meaning. So it might be using something like the American Thanksgiving, even though we're here in South Africa. I know of families who are using that concept to give thanks to people who've passed. It could be the Christian Easter. It could be even just creating a day out of nowhere that the family chooses to remember the many people who've gone before us. And not only people that we're still grieving or hurting over the loss. It could be, right down from people in history. So we kind of really need to help children to feel a sense of belonging not only to the family and the community that they live in, but also to the community and to our ancestors as such, people who've gone before us. So I think it's got a lot to do with how not only we can get children talking about it, but how we as families can become more comfortable talking. And then I think the other way is to simply raise it by sharing one of one's own memories, and letting memories be important things to remember. So it could be like, the caller mentioned, say that there's a grandparent who's been lost. It could be like, oh, look at this book. Remember who gave it to you. It could be, look at the photograph. We're going to now put some family photographs up and we're going to include people in it. So sometimes I think with children, it can be tangible reminders that can make the conversation a lot easier. So I think that, I guess it's difficult to know because every family has their own way and their own needs, and their own unmet needs that need to be addressed. But I think that could be one way to start, is for letting children overhear us talking, and to create family traditions and rituals to remembering people who aren't with us in the body form at the moment. And I think then also, for children, there's also going right directly to the issue. And that's something that I find as a therapist. Over the years, I've become so much more direct with children. And I've just found the response so much, I think it's maybe as I've matured in my own work as well. But sometimes children just really need the direct route. It's like, we haven't spoken about Granny for a long time. Like, what have you been thinking? This is what I've been thinking. sometimes we just need to get to it, because it becomes a proverbial elephant in the room. We all know it's there, but no one's talking about it. But believe me, kids can see the elephants. You know, the kids know what we're not talking about as much as what we do talk about. So sometimes it's just to be fearless and ask that question. Like, do you miss Granny? What are you thinking about? What do you remember? Like, just talk about it. And I think sometimes it's our own, once we get to the point where we're comfortable enough to be direct with children, it's that kind of authenticity and connection with our own inner selves and our own inner child, that it flows a lot easier. And I think when that's an issue, children can be amazing healers in families. And I think in times of grief, talking to children in a very simple, direct, honest way can actually bring a lot of healing for the adults as well. Often we're led by a child.
I know I had a child. I also had a child, 7-year-old, and his mom had, advanced cancer. And we had chatted about how the body, is the costume, but the soul is eternal. And when his mom left the body, when she passed away, he actually lay on her, and then he comforted his dad, and he told his dad, Dad, this is only the costume, and Mom is still alive, and so he supported his dad. So I understand, Anwen, what you're sharing. So Nina, you also wanted to share?
Yes, just very, very briefly. I totally agree with all of what Anwen has just said in response to the question, and including you. But the thought that came to mind is that children are our mirrors. Whatever is it that is going on within us that we are not engaging with, it's those inner silent chatter or non-chatter. That is what the child is picking up on and expressing in a very physical way. And because we're not aware of what's going on inside ourselves, and we see the child expressing it, we're alarmed. But we need to really get to a place where we can see the connection, that the child is really just being the mirror for us. It's beautiful.
Wonderful. Yes, that's quite wonderful. I know some of my friends who work with children, they say, these values or these subtle things can't be taught but caught. And so children are catching all the time. So it's not about what you say to them, but all the heaviness you carry within, they are catching that. And
yes.
And if you've processed the stuff yourself and are able to connect, that's why I guess, and when you're so fearless in approaching the children, because you've done that work. But as a parent, I guess it does require that we do that inner work so that the child can feel I can speak and I can approach. So it's amazing how it's really a lot about us as the carers, the parent or the educator, and taking care of that unmet needs within so that I can meet the need of the child outside. Yeah. So another question, how do you prepare a child for a potential loss of a grandparent? So how do you prepare a child for a potential loss of a grandparent? So many are quite stressed with, and so they don't tell the child about what's happening, but the child is quite aware of what is happening. So what advice can you give such parents, educators, caregivers?
So if I'm stressed inside about the loss, the ultimate loss of my the person, then the child is picking up on that as well. So it's about really dealing with my grief, that even before the eventuality of that passing, it's dealing with that. And when I deal with that, the child is automatically in sync with what's going on for me, and I can then have that conversation with the child. But it's almost as if I'm resisting being in that, my feelings, and being unconscious to my feelings, then I cannot engage with the child. My cup is not yeah, my cup is empty.
Mm.
Goes back to that. Yeah, my cup is empty. Or my trauma jar is too full.
Yes, thank you.
I think that's a really good place to start. I think going back to some of the concepts that I mentioned in the stories is that we need to be as honest as possible and as appropriate with children, because what children don't understand or what they pick up and can't ask about, they either act out or they make up stories to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And I'm just reminded of the story of the friend who believes that he can get cancer from oatmeal porridge, where children they start to create their own links between things, and often their own thoughts are far scarier than the reality. And children are very concrete, and they're also although they've got amazing imaginations and creativity, they also can be quite reality-based. And often reality is a whole lot more manageable than their fantasy. And often for children, knowing that their parents are being straight with them and giving them correct information that they can process brings a whole lot more security than evading what's actually happening. Because yes, children are mirrors, and they're also sponges. They listen and they absorb everything that's going on around them emotionally and with regards to facts. So they're listening to conversations, and we think they're playing with their toys, but they're listening, not necessarily understanding, but listening. So I think one of the ways of preparing children for the death of a grandparent or a family member or a teacher is to start with the question, well, what do you already know? Because sometimes, as the stories have shown, they're misperceptions, and other times they know far more than we realize they know. And sometimes what we need to do is to fill in the gaps. And sometimes what we need to do is to correct information. And sometimes it's to put it in ways that they can understand. So it's not about the whole story, but to answer the questions that they have as accurately as possible. And I think that does come best from a full cup. And it's very hard to have a full cup when one's going through the trauma of loss, because as much as it's part of life, it's a difficult part of life. It's not something that we always welcome. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we don't. But I think our children can really be the inspiration to dig deep, because I think the love that a parent or a grandparent has for a child or an aunt, or if you love a child, I think they're a great source of inspiration for courage and the ability to dig deep. And we don't have to be completely self-actualized and mature and wise, because we gain that wisdom only through experience. So we don't have to have it all together to be able to reach for a child. Sometimes it's say, I'm scared too. I'm worried too. We don't know what's happening. We don't know if he's going to die. We don't know when. It's scary waiting. It's a terrible time, but we're in it together. Sometimes children can handle that, but they need to trust the people who love them to tell them the truth, because that's where a kind of security will come that will help them to process what is going on in their realities at the pace that they can manage in their own way.
Thank you. So it's wonderful, like you shared, that it's easier sometimes to deal with the reality than the fantasy. And so start that conversation. I know just this week, a mother was telling me that she told her teenager, do you know what I'm going through? Because she's anticipating the loss of her mom. And the child told her, don't you think I'm going through the same thing as well? And so it was such an honest conversation, and she was shocked, and she realized that it's not just her journey, but that openness between mom and son was quite admirable, And so just one last question. How do you know when to seek help for a child? Because many also want to know, how do they know when to seek that next level of support, professional support?
Thanks for asking that. It was in my notes and I left it out. So thank you for that question. I think there really isn't any one correct way. I think there are so many angles to look at it. And the one time that is when you as a family are battling to contain the child's emotions and are not able to be the calm for your child because of the trauma or whatever it is you're going through, that's a very valid time to ask for help. It could be from a psychologist, it could be from a family member, it could be someone in the community. But what I've certainly found as a professional is that there have been many times when there's been a very difficult loss to process. The best help I can do is to say to people, I'm going to look after your child for this hour or for this time, that you can come to me for guidance, that I'm not grieving. And that it's a way of taking some of the pressure off of reducing that trauma jar. There's someone else looking after this aspect for your child, so you can actually fill your cup and deal with your grief. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very valid time to ask for help. I think another time is when a child is stuck at some point. And by stuck, I mean that they're not processing through the grief and it's affecting their daily life. Look, it's normal for children to battle for up to 2 years. And it's normal for a child, every time they go through the next developmental stage, to revisit the grief if it's someone that they've had a strong attachment to. But I think if a child if their school marks are dropping substantially, that's a good time. Mm-hmm. I think if a child starts acting in, they become very withdrawn, very tearful, not communicating. If they're not eating properly, they're not sleeping well, I think that's a good time to ask for help. And in the same way for a child who's acting out, a child who becomes unusually hostile, a child who's angry, or who maybe, is becoming, there's more sibling rivalry, battling with friends. So if there's something that the child's not moving through easily, often speaking to a professional is a way for us to kind of give the child a voice, because often children speak through imagery and through play. And I think that's what child therapists are often. We're translators. And very often what I find is 1 or 2 sessions to see where the child's stuck or what they're trying to communicate, and they need to communicate through play but not through words. Giving that feedback to the parents and to the family will be able to just embrace the child and move on with them. So sometimes it's an interpreter, but sometimes there's a need for an outside person to hold the space when the family are struggling with trauma or the child not moving through the process easily on their own. Your thoughts?
No, it's okay. Basically, I think you're the expert because you've been working so much hands-on in those situations. It's beautiful to hear. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So I can't thank you both. My heart feels so full and my cup feels very full with lots of, insights on how to navigate through this process of dealing with loss and grief. And you've made it so possible, and it's not such a scary phase that one has to go through in supporting these young people that can be more resilient than we can be. And so I really appreciate your time and your energy that you've put into offering this to all of us, and many on YouTube and on the Zoom chat, just expressing their thanks and appreciation to both of you for sharing your wisdom and your personal experiences with us. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who have joined. And luckily this is on YouTube. So I think it will be a valuable resource to share with many others so that they can help themselves and help the children and the teenagers that are grieving. And so thank you both, Anwin and Nina, once again. And we want to end with a beautiful song sung by an amazing choir called One Voice Choir. And they are in the United States, and it's on memories. So it's a beautiful song that we'd like to end with. But all the appreciation coming from everyone on Zoom. So thanks from the heart for your time and energy. do you want to have any last words before we share this beautiful song?
Thank you to everyone for joining with us. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. And I think just to be having the conversation about this really important aspect of life is a good reminder to cherish what we have and not to forget or lose contact with people who've passed.
Yes, wonderful. So to celebrate them. And that's what the song is about. So I'd ask the host now to share this beautiful song with us.
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Close to the ones here today, close to the ones that we lost on the way, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories, and the memories bring back you. There's a time that I remember when I did not know no pain, when I believed in forever and everything would stay the same. Now my heart feel like December when somebody say your name, 'cause I can't reach out to call you, but I know I will one day, yeah.
Everybody hurts sometimes, everybody hurts someday, yeah. But everything will be alright. Go with your voice and say, hey.
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Close to the ones here today, close to the ones that we lost on the way, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories, and the memories bring back you. Memories bring back you. There's a time that I remember when I never felt so lost, when I felt that all the hatred was too powerful to stop. Now my heart feels like an ember, and it's lighting up the dark. I'll carry these torches for you, that you know I'll never drop, yeah.
Everybody hurts sometimes, everybody hurts someday, hey, hey. But everything gon' be alright. Go and raise your voice and say, hey.
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Close to the ones here today, close to the ones that we lost on the way, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories, and the memories bring back you. Do 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 do. Memories bring back you. Do 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 do. Memories bring back you. Do 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 do. Memories bring back you. Here's to the ones. Memories bring back you. Here's to the ones. Memories bring back you. Memories bring back you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day. And thanks for joining, and thanks so much to our speakers.